Welcome again to the Sikh Coalition's Summer Series webinar on advocating for Sikhs in Afghanistan. My name is Sanjay Singh. I'm the Senior Manager of Advocacy and Policy here at the Sikh Coalition. So glad all of you could join us on today's interesting panel. We've got some great speakers lined up for you. As an introduction to Sikh Coalition, our goal is to join a worldwide effort to ensure that Afghanistani Sikhs and Hindus are safe from extinction. Whereas the World Sikh Organization is leading efforts for Canadian resettlement, the Sikh Coalition and others, specifically Manmeet Singh, Deepak Ahluwalia, and Rajdeep Jolly Singh, are focusing their efforts here in the United States on how we can help everyone in Afghanistan. As a quick introduction, I will be introducing Balpreet Singh. Balpreet Singh received his law degree from the University of Ottawa. After articulating with a boutique disability and human rights law firm in Toronto, he became legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada in 2009. His practice focuses on human rights law and religious accommodation. Balpreet Singh has helped resolve several key accommodation issues for Sikhs in Canada, including accommodation for the wearing of the Kirpan in courthouses in Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, on BIA rail trains, as well as in Canadian embassies and consulates internationally. He serves as spokesperson for the WSO and is regularly consulted on Sikh issues in Canada by national media outlets. Balpreet Singh has worked with various public and private sector organizations to create resources and provide trainings on religious accommodation issues and best practices when interacting with persons of the Sikh faith. He currently serves as director for the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. We also have with us today Asha Marie Kaur. Asha Marie Kaur is currently a researcher at the Sikh Research Institute, SICRI, and an incoming sociology PhD student at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where she intends to expand her work on migration and urban spaces in South Asia. Her work with Afghani Sikhs originates with her interviews in 2017 of refugees in Delhi, which form the basis for her thesis, Afghanistan is Our Homeland, Stories of Afghani Sikhs, Forced Migration, Survival, and Adaptation to a New Land, the first ever English language study of Afghani Sikhs as a distinct group. A Persian-speaking Sikh with family ties to the Iranian Sikh community, she uses her language skills to showcase overlooked Sikh narratives. To turn over, I'd like to give the opportunity for Balpreet to also introduce himself. Balpreet, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. So I'm not naturally someone who would have been working on the Afghanistan Sikh issue, but I guess my story starts in 2014 when I got a random call in the really early morning from a +93 number. I didn't even know what +93 was. I'd heard, obviously 91 is India. When I picked up the phone call, it was a Sikh from Helmand province in Afghanistan. And he said he lives near Lashkargah and that their stores had been stoned and they'd shut them down now. Their kids can't go to school. On the radio, they're calling for a boycott of Sikhs and Hindus. And he was asking for help. He said, I don't know where to go. We don't know where to go. So that's where really my story started. I then reached out to several politicians, individuals in the community for advice. And the person that really picked it up was Manmeet Singh Pullar, who is an MLA in Alberta. He's a member of the Legislative Assembly there. And he was saying that he wanted a project. He said that I have more time. He used to be a minister and then his government came out of power. He was in opposition. And he'd said to me, Balpreet, if you ever have a project for me, let me know. And I called him, I said, what do you think about this? And he really embraced that project. He called his contacts internationally. So this would have been, January, February. And then that summer, he actually traveled to India and had a delegation from Helmand meet him in Amritsar. And he got to know their problems. And then he got to work on having them create travel documents, getting them tickets to leave in small batches so that it wouldn't be very obvious that they're leaving. And he brought them all to India and they stayed at Khadur Sahib, and he arranged all of that. Sadly, he passed away in the fall of that year. But his family and the Manmeet Singh Puller Foundation have carried on that work, and WSO has been carrying on that work. So that's briefly how I've gotten involved in this file.
That's a really interesting story. Thank you for sharing it. And I'm sure we'll ask some more questions to get some of your experiences and work that you've been doing to help assist the Afghani Sikhs. And Asha, I'd like to turn it over to you to provide a brief introduction of how you've been involved with some of this work.
Yeah, so in 2017, decided to go to Delhi to write my undergraduate thesis on the Afghan Sikh community. And I don't mean to split hairs here, but Afghans of all backgrounds prefer to be called Afghans because the currency of the country is actually called the Afghani. So there's kind of a lot of people say, we're not the currency, we're the people. Yes, I decided to set out to construct a full narrative because I got involved in this because I noticed that Afghan Sikhs were kind of trending in the news a little bit more, but it was always that the person interviewing them came with a very specific set of questions and wanted to speak to the community with regards to a trending news issue. So if that issue is the Taliban, then they're trying to get answers about the Taliban. But then some people would say, actually, I came here before the Taliban were in power. I'd rather talk about my experience under the Mujahideen. But I was noticing a disconnect in these articles. Or, if people were asking about Indian politics, they'd want answers on that. So I said, I want to go and I want to have people tell me the whole story. You can start from any era and end at any point, and let's map out both the history of the war in Afghanistan from a Sikh perspective and also Indian refugee policy from an Afghan Sikh perspective. And there's very interesting intersectional story that comes out of that. I first got interested in the community because I was with my Dadima in Delhi, and she grew up in Iran, and she was telling me how we were driving through an Afghan neighborhood, and she said, these Sikhs have been here for a couple decades now, but a lot of people still look at them like there's something odd about them, there's something strange about them. But for me, they remind me of home. So that's how I got interested in this. And through learning Farsi, I felt like I had an opportunity to, also speak to people in one of their native languages.
Wow. So you must have gotten some really interesting background of the history of Sikhs in Afghanistan before the violence of Sikhs happened in that country. You probably have a good insight into immigration patterns. Would you be able to share with some of the viewers what you've learned on that front?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say that in a lot of these stories of diaspora, people often reference the common golden era. And in this case, that golden era would probably be the 70s. Many Afghan Sikhs, along with Hindus, because these are communities that have kind of stood together, they were successful. They had big businesses. They were the backbone of a lot of the economy. They served in government positions, had good relationships with all sorts of institutions. So things really went downhill. And this is not that different from the common Afghan story. Things, went downhill in '79 with the Soviet invasion. That's when the first generation left. This is a bit of a generalization, but generally speaking, the people who left earlier were people with more resources, and over time, the people who, people with fewer and fewer resources that leave later and later. But the most serious and grave point in the history was between 1992 and 1996, after the fall of President Najibullah at the hands of Mujahideen forces. This is when 90% of the community fled the country. Then the Taliban came to power in 1996, and the Taliban fell from official power in 2001 with the US forces coming in. So that the bulk of the population left in those very specific years. A lot of people would leave to India first because it was the easiest place to get to. But today, the largest Afghan Sikh community is in the UK, followed by India. But again, India oftentimes is the place people go to first. There are big communities in Germany, in Sweden, in Denmark, in France, Belgium, the Netherlands. My friend Pritpal Singh goes by the Dutch Sikh for his social media platforms. And then there is a community in Canada as well. Roughly speaking, this is a community that has migrated later. And in the US, it's actually a very small community. So the population is a little bit similar as far as its distribution as the Punjabi Sikh diaspora, but in some ways quite different in that the US is much less represented, and there's a lot of European countries where quite a great deal of the Sikh population is Afghan Sikh. So I think that's something that people don't necessarily realize. There's, not that big of a Sikh population in a place like France or Germany, but quite a big representation of Afghan Sikhs.
That's really interesting to know. Well, Preet, would you be able to share a little bit more about what the last decade or so of violence against Sikhs has happened in Afghanistan and the current state of affairs?
Yeah, so it's very complicated, and I am by no means an expert. I can tell you some of what I understand. So as Asha said, that in 1992 to 96, there was the first exodus, the really big exodus that I can think of. And I'm told that Majnu Ka Tilla is a Gurdwara in Delhi. I'm told that a huge number of Afghan Sikhs were living in the Majnu Ka Tilla Gurdwara compound in very bad conditions, in tents, and that's a period of real disappointment for them, that no one really came to their assistance. And that has really been a memory that they've lived with, that even now when someone tells them, like in 2015, when we first started discussing the option of moving some of them to Canada, this was a real recurring theme, which was no one helped us in 1992 to 93, 94. A lot of them actually then left India and went back to Afghanistan thinking that it's better to go back to their home country than to live in these conditions. And they were saying, no one helped us then, why is anyone going to help us now? Under the Taliban, the story that all of us have probably heard is that they had to wear those armbands, or their houses had to have like flags, the yellow flags. What I'm told is that under the Taliban, obviously that's humiliating, it's problematic, but they're saying that the protection that they had under the Taliban was actually better than what followed. That after the fall of the Taliban, things actually got worse for them. So you're at a place right now where the current generation of these Afghan Sikhs and Hindus, their children haven't gotten the opportunity to get a proper education. They don't have opportunities in terms of professions. They have their small shops and they make their living out of those shops generally. But in terms of extortion, kidnapping, land mafias, their life is very, very difficult. And I'll give you something that they told me that was shocking to me. They said to me that they go out in groups so that they won't be alone and won't be kidnapped or attacked. And that they were on a bus, and the bus broke down. And they said that the bus turned on them, and people were saying that it's because of you that this bus is broken down. It's a curse to have people like you on our bus, and as a result, we've all been inconvenienced. And the bus was turning on these two Sikh passengers for no reason. I mean, they were stuck just like all the other passengers. So stuff like that, even really humiliating things like spitting in their milk, that they're going to get milk and the shop owner is spitting in it just to, I guess, humiliate them. So it's been very, very difficult and progressively has gotten worse, I think.
What do you think has been happening over the past 1 to 2 years specifically in the country? I know it sounds like it's getting worse, and is there any insight that you can share on that?
So the past 1 to 2 years, the fighting in some areas has gotten worse. For example, the Sikhs in Ghazni have had to live with the constant threat of Ghazni being a conflict zone. Even I called just a couple of days ago and I was told that the fighting is still in the areas around, and one Sikh shopkeeper was actually stranded while there was fighting all around him. So it really depends on the area that you're in. Kabul had been more stable. Places like Jalalabad and Ghazni were less stable. Uh, but example, you were talking about the 1 to 2 years. 2 years ago, in July the 1st, 2018, you saw that the entire leadership of this community, all the senior people in the Afghan, Sikh, and Hindu community were going to meet with government officials, the president, and they were blown up by a suicide bomber. That was absolutely devastating. To have all your senior members that you look up to that are leading the community die in one day. And remember that they don't have a line of people who have a lot of education or experience dealing with government. The ones that are left now are very, very vulnerable and don't have the same influence and resources as the previous community members who have left. So for the past 2 years, I would say it's a real dangerous situation and a real feeling of not if they will be attacked, when they will be attacked.
So right now, yeah, go ahead, Asha.
Yeah, I just want to add from a, Afghan political perspective. The past 2 years, I mean, the Jalalabad attack was a devastating blow and a huge breaking point. There were people who, were still holding out hope, and that was the moment where that really got shattered. Furthermore, this group that was behind both that attack and the attack in March this year, the Islamic State of the Khorasan province, has been escalating, and the Afghan government is just not equipped to deal with it. And the attacks in the past 2 years against the Hazara community have also been extreme. These are a Shia ethnic minority in Afghanistan. And there's been lots of promises made. So, there's always a statement, oh, we stand with the Sikhs and Hindus of Afghanistan. But from a security perspective, I mean, there really has been no progress. And these attacks have become, really gut-wrenchingly common and severe. Weddings being blown up in the Hazara community, for example, just really, really horrifying stuff. So the attacks specifically on ethnic and religious minorities are escalating quite a bit.
That is really horrific. And I think it's hard for Sikhs who are living in the West to really understand what some of the worries are happening on the ground on a day-to-day basis for the Sikh community in Afghanistan. What are the concerns of shopkeepers, parents, other community members? What's keeping them up at night? Can either one of you share a little bit about that?
I can start, I guess. Asha can definitely add. Their kids aren't educated. They have their schooling inside the Gurdwara compound, but even women going out have to wear the burqa. And I can't speak to how the Sikhs in Jalalabad or Ghazni feel about this, but the ones that came from Helmand felt absolutely suppressed by this, that why do our women have to wear this thing? They didn't want to wear it, and that was really something that they've told us about. Currently, I asked them what's going on. So in Kabul, there's only one family that owns a house there. Everyone else, around, I was told 80% of the Sangat there lives in Gurdwaras. 20% are living in rental accommodations. And there's one family that owns their actual house, no other ownership. Ghazni, there's a smaller community, around 80 people are left. And their biggest concern is that Ghazni was home to so many Sikh Gurdwaras, like by Nandlal Ji's place of birth. And then there's another historic Gurdwara where they say Guru Gobind Singh Ji appeared. And then there's two Singh Sabha Gurdwaras. So who's going to take care of these places? And there were so many like Swarups of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji from Puratan times, even the Manjis that were from the Manji period. So much history that is disappearing in front of our eyes. It's really sad that probably in the very near future, Ghazni, which was such a hub of Sikh activity and will always be remembered in our history as being so important, will be devoid of Sikhs. There will be no Sikhs left in Ghazni. So, I mean, it's a real sad period. Day-to-day life continues in the sense that, you know, they're still going to their shops, I'm told, but that sense of fear, the sense of this is about to end, the way we live is about to finish, I can't imagine how that feels.
Yeah, and there's a great deal of uncertainty as to what's next, you know. I have been talking with people that, you know, they're saying, you know, I have lost hope and I don't want to leave my home, but I have to. But what is next in India? You know, I know how to run my business in Afghanistan. I don't know how to run my business there. And again, that memory of not being helped back in the 90s stays strong. So I think that the one thing that gives people some hope is that they're really hopeful that at least if they get to India, their kids could be educated and, you know, could go freely to school. I mean, bullying of children and harassment of children is extreme. There's a lot of videos and documentaries where they interview children about their experiences as well. But yeah, it's one of those situations where people they don't want to leave, but they have to, you know. Those things coexist in the same experience. So, but it's not simple. The path forward is not going to be simple either.
And Balpreet, many people may not be aware of the Manmeet Bhullar Foundation. Could you share a little bit more about what the organization is currently doing in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so the foundation carried on where Manmeet left his work. So it's run by his family. And their main mission was to take the families, around 250 people that were evacuated from Helmand, and to arrange for their sponsorship to come to Canada. So I can say that about 1/3 of those individuals, of those families, have managed to make their way to Canada. And that would have been, I guess, a year ago. We were hoping for more, but obviously things have changed this year because of the pandemic. But arranging for their sponsorships, like WSO has been involved in arranging for the sponsorships and helping in whatever way we can. For example, if you want to sponsor a refugee family here in Canada, you can do it as a group of 5. So you pledge around, it's around $30,000 per person now. And you have to deposit that money into a trust account. And then you submit a plan of how you will be supporting these individuals on their arrival, and you take responsibility for them for 1 year. All of the paperwork is being arranged by the Manmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation. So in terms of their actual work in Afghanistan, that's not something they're currently doing, but helping the families that were brought out, particularly from Helmand, is something that they're actively working on. And there's definitely an openness and a willingness to help now as more families leave, and doing the same thing in terms of sponsorships and finding ways for them to come to Canada as well.
And Asha, based on the historical introduction you provided us, it sounds like a lot of the stories of resettlement aren't yet closed chapters for many families. Is that a correct assessment here?
Yes, definitely. So some background on kind of the South Asian refugee situation. Neither India nor Pakistan are signatories of either the 1951 Refugee Convention or the 1967 Refugee Protocol of the United Nations. This means there's no nationalized refugee system. Everything kind of functions on an ad hoc basis, and there's not really good accountability measures. So in the 90s, Afghan Sikhs were pretty freely let into the country. In fact, I was told several times, you know, we crossed at the border with Pakistan with nothing. You know, some of us didn't even have our identification on us. So that's fine, all well and good. But once you get there, it kind of becomes a little bit of a mess because as a arriving refugee, you're supposed to sign up with the UNHCR. All they give you is a UNHCR identification, which you can then take to the foreign registration office to kind of assert your right to be there. But it doesn't give you any tangible rights in society besides the right to be. So this means that people get stuck in this waiting period where they don't legally have the right to open a business or sign a lease. And then there's also lots of discrimination in India, and particularly in Delhi, where even when you get a long-term stay visa, a lot of landlords will say, I don't really know if I'm allowed to rent to you. Schools may say, I don't really know if I'm allowed to enroll your children, even if they are. So this is a big problem finding schools. There are some Afghan Sikh-run schools that do a really great job, but they're also bursting at the seams. They're taking a lot of incoming Hazara refugees as well. So technically speaking, anyone, no matter how they arrived to India, was supposed to get nationalization after 12 years of residence. I sat with maybe 50 people, and I only met 2 people who had succeeded in getting their Indian nationality. I know that there's been a lot of, what about CAA? Unfortunately, the CAA doesn't mean that the bureaucracy suddenly functions smoothly. This is an understaffed system. It's a very disorganized system, and it's a system that has a lot of discrimination. If we don't educate the ordinary bureaucratic worker on who an Afghan Sikh is, it doesn't, Afghans of all backgrounds are treated very poorly by this system. So there hasn't been much progress in really securing full nationality. There's a lot of promises. So, and these are people who have been in India since the 90s, and there's still a struggle. If you don't get nationality, your kids, there's no birthright citizenship in India. You only get citizenship upon birth if your parents had it. So if your parents didn't have it, so there's a generation that's been born in India that is fundamentally stateless. So these are the struggles. There's a chapter that has not been closed. There are still people struggling quite a bit. And I hope that we can advocate for more transparency and stronger institutions to actually follow through. Because again and again, it's not that the legal right hasn't been there. The legislation is there, but there's an issue with follow through. And this is a South Asia-wide issue. I mean, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all these places have this kind of ad hoc system and a lot of broken bureaucracy. So.
We also have a question from the audience. There seems to be Afghan Sikhs who speak Pashto, and yes, it's bad that they can't go back. However, they seem to be better off in Pakistan and settling there. Can you expand more about Afghan Sikhs in Pakistan?
Yeah, I can address that. So Afghan Sikhs traveling to Pakistan, like Punjab Sahib, was not uncommon. It was very common. But there's definitely a resolution amongst them that they don't want to move to Pakistan as an interim step. Some of on a lesser scale, the problems that they experience in Afghanistan are also there in Pakistan. So issues around murder, extortion, kidnapping in Peshawar, for example, they're there. And they don't want to go from one bad situation to a less bad situation. They want to go where they don't have to worry about sending their kids out. They don't have to worry about going out themselves. So would it be better in Pakistan? Yeah, probably comparatively, but I don't think they want to go there. They just don't feel entirely safe. Like, I'll give you my example. I recently went to Punjab Sahib, and before, when I had gone many years ago, you could walk around the town. It wasn't an issue. This time I was told in no uncertain terms that I should not exit the compound. I was told that even walking on the upper level, like it's surrounded by a saran, that walking on the roof of the saran to look around, that would be problematic, that I should not go up there. So I can understand why they wouldn't want to go from one situation to another where they're still not entirely free. Delhi has its own problems, like Asha mentioned. There's issues of police officers extorting money there as well. They can't send their kids to schools, accessing medical care, all that's there. But it's not, I think it's a different experience than even in Pakistan. It's a little bit more free there, and they have already an established community. So they don't want to go to Pakistan, in short.
Can you explain a little bit about the refugee process and what the WSO and the Manmeet Bhullar Foundation have been specifically advocating for?
Yeah, so once again, as Asha mentioned, you go to India or your refugee first arrival and you get your UNHCR card. The timeline for that keeps growing. When we had started, it wasn't as long. Now we're looking at a year and a half, sometimes 2 years to get your card. So that involves getting an interview done, and they're sort of trying to determine if you're a legitimate refugee. They're going through their steps. Once they have the UNHCR cards, then they can be sponsored as private refugees, these 5 or institutional sponsors. So once they have the UNHCR cards, the process is that groups of 5 here, they pledge their money, put their money into the trust account, and then they submit a plan along with all the other documents. And for 1 year from their arrival here in Canada, the sponsors are responsible if they go on social assistance. So they're not to go on social assistance, and all integration, whether it's helping them find a place to stay or finding them employment, that's on the sponsors. That's their responsibility. And I can tell you that from our experience, it's been now a year. So since the first arrival of these refugees from Helmand, it's been not so bad at all. It's been that these refugees want to work. Some of them are very ambitious. For example, the one that first initially contacted me, Shamsher Singh, he's been doing well. His kids are in school. He sent me video of his kids speaking English with a proud message, look, my kids can speak English. And some of them want to open shops. They're saying, we want to open grocery stores. This is their next big step. So they're doing well here, and they haven't required over-the-top assistance. So I'm not worried about any of that. And what our what our ask is that we want a direct sponsorship program. So initially, and still this is our ask, it was that instead of sending them to India first, let's bring them directly from Afghanistan to Canada. And this has happened, for example, for Syrian refugees. And the Minister of Immigration under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, Section 25, it's 25.2, has the ability to create a special program. And so usually you can't bring refugees directly, but in this case, under that 25.2 provision, he can create a special program. And even we've said now that even if they do make their way to Delhi, that we still want a special program so that they're not waiting in line for 5 years, just like the Helmand refugees are currently waiting. It's so difficult in that these family units, you're breaking them up into what the Canadian government wants, but they're artificial. They're all living together. So we have a family unit where the daughter has arrived because she was over 18. Her father's still in India, and she was never separated from her father to begin with. So it's such a difficult situation, and they just keep waiting and waiting. So Canada had created a special program for Tibetan refugees in Arunachal Pradesh, and those Tibetan refugees were brought under that special program. What we are asking for and what we're hoping we can get is that special program so they can be brought directly here without that long time wait. And we'll bear the cost. We've already said that as a community.
And here in the United States, the Sikh Coalition has been advocating as well for the resettlement of these Afghan Sikhs into the United States. And our legal structure here is through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, which operates through priority designations. And these designations can be provided by the embassy. And so the ask of the Sikh Coalition through members of Congress and the US State Department, along to the White House and a couple of other entities at the federal level, that has been the ask that the Sikh Coalition has made. And we were able to get bipartisan support of at least 20 senators who sent a letter to Secretary of State Pompeo asking for the special designation of Afghan Sikhs to be given refugee priority status here in the United States. And so that's the existing structure here. And you know, I think we hear about the advocacy that we're doing here in the United States and Canada, but what is the ultimate resolution that Afghan Sikhs and Hindus want to see? What is the positive resolution that they are hoping for?
I think in the short term, it's really, you know, I think these statements are powerful and important that, you know, politicians are in India, in the US, in Canada are pledging their support, but I think it needs to move to, okay, how are we going to get people, how is the actual plane going to take people? And then how are we going to ensure that no one struggles even further if they are, for example, in India? A particularly important case is there's a lot of widows who, when they move to India, struggle immensely. And yes, and family separation is a big issue. So, and you know, asserting that, giving people their choices, you know, some people may not want to stay in India. Some people may want to be in India for as short of a time as possible and go to Canada. Some people may want support in exploring other options. A lot of people have family members in Europe, you know, that have been separated for many years. So I just think that I'm very glad to see the statements of support, but I think there's still kind of a little bit of a frozen in time element right now. I know a lot of it has to do with COVID, but that's the real question, is when's the movement going to happen? And then I also think that on the Afghanistan side, it would be I think it is critical for there to be some plan for the maintenance and care of these Sikh sites. I mean, recently, a man who actually lives in India came back to Afghanistan to be the caretaker for a Gurdwara and was kidnapped by a land mafia. So what happens when there's no one there to be the caretaker even? So I really do think that a plan for historic preservation is key. And there are a lot of people vested in this. Afghan Sikhs are not alone in being concerned about preserving the history of non-Muslim minorities in the country. So, but it requires, there's been a lot of statements again. Time to, let's figure out what the action is going to look like there.
So I'll also just put it in my 2 cents. So it looks like, I'm not saying anything like inside information, this is already on the internet, that India has agreed to move them from Afghanistan, beginning with the families of the victims of the March 25th attack. So it looks like in the next couple of weeks, we will have a large number, I'm hoping, arrive in India. In terms of the Gurdwara that are being left behind, many of the towns no longer have Sarups of Sri Guru Granth Sahib. Many of the Gurdwara in advance of this move have already sent the Sarups out of Afghanistan. I asked, for example, what's going to be happening to some Gurdwara. And I'm told that there's been caretakers who've taken care of the Gurdwara for many years. I was given 2 examples of 2 historic Gurdwara, that one had an 8-year-old, from 8 years this caretaker had been there, and another one for even longer. And that all they've asked for is that we want a room by the gate, and you can lock the Gurdwara and you just give us the key to the main gate, and it'll be taken care of under us. They seem to be satisfied with that. I'm obviously a little bit more cynical, that I have concerns of this happening on a mass scale, that This is how it begins, that, you know, you just want a couple of rooms by the gate, and then who knows if the kids or the grandkids down the road start to see it as their own property, and then we've lost it. I mean, this has happened many times in the past, for example, in Pakistan and many gurdwaras. I know that Akal Takht Sahib's Karjkari Jathedar Gyani Harpreet Singh had asked for the gurdwaras to be photographed properly and properly documented that way, and I salute him for that thinking. But it's really a tragedy in that when we started this project in 2014, our thoughts were, is there any way that the Sikhs there can stay because of the heritage that is obviously associated with Sikhs in Afghanistan? But now it's become very clear that the vast majority of the Sikhs there don't want to stay, can't stay. So how do we preserve that history? Very difficult, and as a Panth, we're going to have to think about it and support our Afghan Sikhs, Sikh brothers and sisters in making that possible.
I think we agree with you. We need to keep up the pressure, but we need action, and that's what we all have to collectively push for. Can you share any other suggestions about ways that we can achieve historic preservation?
This is like kind of a small step, but I think learning about where these sites are and the history and communicating that more effectively, that gives us an idea of what we're looking at, where we're fighting for this preservation. This is a very small thing, especially for people who might be new to the issue but interested, because I don't think it's clear to many people how widespread throughout the entire country Sikh history is. So.
And Prithpal Singh did a great job with his video documentation of Sikh gurdwaras and shrines there. That was a great step, and hopefully we can build on that.
Yeah.
So how do we help? What's next for our community? What can the Sikh diaspora do for Afghan Sikhs?
I guess I'll start. So whenever you're doing advocacy, Sim, I'm sure you can appreciate this. You have to sort of time your things at the right time. Otherwise you run into sort of fatigue that, you know, what are we supposed to do? This is an issue. We're not making a breakthrough. What we've sort of been trying to do is push the issue at key times, but we are working on it throughout. Like I gave an update recently that we've met with 40 MPs since the March attack, submitted a memorandum to each one of them. We've been meeting every week and now every 2 weeks with representatives from the Immigration Refugee Canada to figure out a way we can make this happen. We're working on a couple of other things that hopefully we can make live this week. But I'll tell you what someone said to me. It was an MP. When I brought this up with him, he goes, Balpreet, you keep bugging me about this and that's fine. But he goes, when we're going to the doors, no one's asking us about Afghan Sikhs when we're asking about issues that affect them. This is not an issue that affects the community. And that really hurt me because it is enough. Just because you're not hearing it at the doors doesn't mean that it's not an issue the community cares about. So when we made the call out for emails and contacts, I know thousands of emails were sent to MPs in March and April. I would just ask that keep it in your mind that this is something that we are actively asking the Canadian government to do, in Canada anyways. So when you're meeting with your elected officials, raise it, ask them what's happening, ask them what they've done to support this mission. And I mean, we're getting something. For example, Harjit Singh Sajjan, after the attack, he called his counterparts in Afghanistan and asked for beefed up security. And I've learned that, yeah, that has happened. Security has been enhanced in Kabul. But what we're asking for is that special program, and we will continue to push for that special program because the number's not huge. We've done it for 25,000 Syrian refugees, and rightly so. Canada is a country that prides itself as a refugee home to refugees. We can definitely do it for 500 to 600 Afghan Sikhs and Hindus. And it will not be a burden on the government. The refugees from Syria were brought on government funds. And we've made it very clear that we're not asking for that. We'll pay for it from start to finish. All we're asking for is the permissions. So I'm hopeful that this can happen, and it should happen, especially given our numbers in Canada and our representation.
I think once people do get to India, then there will be more of an opportunity to do that direct aid that's been very difficult in Afghanistan itself. And is very critical for the, those first few years are so critical for someone setting up their new life. So I personally think that I would like to gather some people to help, with the kids with their schooling, teach them English, just kind of be a mentor. That's a really big thing for people. And I really think that we all have to figure out what our role is. Some people like to help in issues on a more interpersonal basis. Some people are better at the big picture advocacy. So, helping one family or one person is just as powerful and important as doing the big picture advocacy. It depends on what your skill set is. Writing for documenting heritage, writing down stories, communicating information, creating a body of history, because there is so much history and so little of it has been documented in a written or visual way. So everyone has their role, and I think, I know people who have gotten involved with helping one family at a time, and they feel really, they're like, okay, this is what I can do, and I feel like I'm able to make an impact here. So it's, no one person can do the big picture advocacy and the one-on-one work and the creative work and the activist work. So we all just should assist each other in Sangha in trying to figure out what we're best at.
Between Balpreet and Asha, I would like to reiterate, there are a couple of things that community members can absolutely do. We can't have fatigue. We need to keep up the pressure. We need to recognize that India is not the end all. Secondly, we need to continue putting pressure on our policymakers. Elections are coming up. Make it a demand before you open your checkbooks and you make your votes, before we invite them into the Gurdwaras to come talk. And don't let up the pressure. Again, that is important. Learn about the historic value of our history in Afghanistan, document that history, and then stay updated through the WSO and through the Sikh Coalition, what is happening in Afghanistan, so that you're fully aware. There'll be continued calls for action, I'm sure, to provide that support individually and for the community. And so that is something I definitely want to reiterate for everyone who's watching, and anyone else who's watching. Please, if you have any questions for either Balpreet, Asha, or myself, type them into the chat box, and we'll definitely try to get to as many questions as we can before we wrap up in the next 10 minutes. And back to the topic at hand, Balpreet and Asha, have recent community fundraising initiatives made any positive impact for Sikhs in Afghanistan? Are there other things maybe that Sikhs outside of Afghanistan can do to help here?
So there have been smaller scale donations that have been delivered. I just want to emphasize that the delivery channels are very difficult, and the amounts have to be kind of small and discreet, and often have to be delivered in person. This isn't, I have said this before, it's not as easy as sending money over PayPal or something like that. And that's helped. But I think that I think that the pressing concerns right now, like in this very moment, are not necessarily ones that will be expedited by money. And then, like for the first few years after leaving Afghanistan, like there is a lot of money available. A lot of people have done amazing fundraising efforts. So how do we make sure it's being used as effectively as possible, and that everyone's benefiting from it, and we can kind of create a sustainable plan. But again, the money that has reached the ground in Afghanistan, it happens on a very piecemeal and personal basis. These are cash deliveries.
Yeah, I can say that throwing money at the problem isn't really the solution. The Sikh community has a lot of money that we can donate from our Daswand and whatnot. and a lot of money was donated on online campaigns. And the amount that has reached Afghanistan, it's been there. Some money has gone there, but we have to remember that they're very vulnerable. So if there's a thought that there's hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars available for these people, then just like what happened to Nidan Singh, who was abducted, we might be putting our brothers and sisters at risk of this same thing. So when money was delivered to Helmand province, for example, everything was very, very discreet. There were no online campaigns about, we're now sending money to Helmand, or we're now bringing Sikhs out of Helmand. I understand advocacy has to be seen. There has to be transparency as well. But I think people sometimes misunderstand that sometimes making noise about these sort of things is not the best way of getting them done. And I think there's a lot of money available for them right now. Once they get to India, that will be a new challenge. For example, I have to say this, Baba Seva Singh Khadur Sahib Wale, he took care of these families for quite a while, almost 2 or 3 years. They lived at Khadur Sahib. He transformed one of his schools into a living compound for them. He gave them a monthly stipend. He gave them professional training. This was all absolutely critical in helping them have a place to stay and integrate into their new life in Canada. He was having the women there learning skills like sewing. There were classes. He was sending the kids to school free of charge. All this was very important. Now, the Man Committee, Sardar Singh Sarsa, he is offered to provide whatever help he can. For example, the 2-week quarantine upon the arrival is something that the Delhi Gurdwara Committee has agreed to take care of in their sarans. I'm hopeful that the Delhi Committee will also continue after the 2-week quarantine and help them with things like finding schools and whatnot. But this is a huge, huge project, and it's not one group who's going to be able to take care of it. When things are hot, then we pay attention to them. But like I'm personally very nervous that once these Sikhs then arrive in Delhi, we're going to forget all about them, and that'll be a really self-defeating sort of thing. That's going to essentially send them into despondence, hopelessness, and if they find that their lives are so horrible in Delhi, you might even see them, some of them heading back to Afghanistan saying, at least we have shops here that we can run. We don't have to beg. So let's not forget, this is going to be an ongoing crisis, ongoing issue. And if they make it to Delhi, excellent, but that's just the start of the next phase.
We also have an audience question. So either Ashok or Brady, if you want to take this one. The question is, how do you suggest we talk to non-Sikhs who are largely unaware about the importance of this issue?
I mean, I talk about this a lot in my work. It was a big part of my thesis as well. Is that the best way to make sure that this issue doesn't get overlooked is to you have to tackle what people's predominant mental images are, or the narratives that they think are holistic, which are not. So this means we need to speak up about the fact that not all, the vast majority of Sikhs are Punjabi, but not all Sikhs are Punjabi. Likewise, the majority of Afghans are Muslim, but not all Afghans are Muslim. So this is it sounds so simple, but this baseline kind of tackling of the predominant narrative is very important. It is only then, because the key reason for this is if we don't talk about who Afghan Sikhs are as Afghan Sikhs, it kind of becomes, there's this assumption that perhaps this is a Punjabi diaspora or an Indian diaspora, and that makes the whole way you look at the issue, it distorts everything, These are people who are starting over in India, This is a group that's losing their home, their one and only watan, their homeland. So I think that is why I really harp on this, is that if we don't start with trying to assert that, then it's really hard to get people to see what a tragedy this is, but also how much work there is to do, that it's not going to be easy. It's not a natural, slide into India. So I think that's really critical. And as far as the fatigue, the global audience has become, quote, fatigued on the issue of Afghanistan. There's been war for decades, and we need to speak up about how this is unacceptable, that countries have meddled in this country and then just given up. Afghan refugees in Europe are being repatriated back to Afghanistan, being told, oh, we don't have room for you here and it's probably safe enough for you there. They're being killed upon their return. So we need to really, we need to break that cycle of the larger Afghanistan fatigue as well, because it hurts Afghan Sikhs. It's always going to hurt the most vulnerable of the community even more.
And Asha, to follow up with that, are there some reliable resources where people can learn more? Will you be publishing any additional information, and will that be available to some of the viewers and everyone else who's interested in this issue?
Yeah, I highly recommend for people on Facebook to follow The Dutch Sikh. That's my friend Prithpal's page, and he also has made these incredible documentaries, one where he goes back to Afghanistan called Mission Afghanistan, and another one about the Afghan Sikh diaspora in the UK, Hindu Kush to Thames. There's also a very good BBC documentary on the last Sikhs of Afghanistan, which I recommend as well. I try to personally share as much information as I can on ongoing issues. I did build a website called saveafghansikhs.org, and if you go to the background tab, there's academic articles, articles written by diaspora members, videos, podcasts, all sorts of stuff if people really want to look into good, reliable sources.
And Balpreet, if there's one thing you want to leave folks with, what would that be for the audience and everyone else who's watching?
I guess it would be make this your problem. As a Panth, we have to look out for each other. And I can't tell you how heartbreaking it was. Like I was watching the funeral of the 25 Sikhs live, and I'll tell you, I felt like crying. It was devastating. These are my brothers and sisters. It's my responsibility to do something. And if I forget, then no one else is looking out for them. So I would say to all my Sikh brothers and sisters, this is our problem. This is our mission. And don't forget about it. Follow up. Make it your problem. Read about it. And for Canadians, definitely, and obviously for Americans now, given the election coming up, when you meet with elected officials, it's not enough to, give them cha and eat a samosa. Raise your issues, and this should be one of the issues that you raise, that this is a vulnerable minority, and we've spoken out for vulnerable minorities like Yazidis and others, that these are no different. And if we, as countries that respect human rights, can't do something, then who will? So in Canada, I'll be pushing hard on it moving forward, and hopefully with your leadership in America, Sikh Coalition and others doing work there, you'll be able to make headway there as well. So make it your problem and make it something that you talk about.
Thank you, Balpreet and Asha, for joining us and providing this very informative discussion. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and we'll be sharing their email addresses. So if you want to get any additional resources, or you have additional questions, or you want to get in touch with either Asha or Balpreet, that information will be provided. But thank you everyone for joining us, and it was a pleasure having you both.
Thank you.